Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. Not only do we talk about practical day-to-day strategies that teachers might use in their classrooms, but we also talk about bigger issues in education and what it means to be an educator in the 21st century. Tonight, I'm really blessed to be joined by Dr. Debbie Almontaser, who is the CEO and president of Bridging Cultures Group. I'm happy to be chatting with Dr. Almontaser about her work in bridging cultures and serving as a DEI consultant. Debbie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, John. It's really a pleasure. Thank you for the work that you do in bridging the gaps and connecting people, and also writing and podcasting about important issues. And this is certainly one of those issues that's really important to highlight and amplify.
This is exactly why I'm super excited to have you on the show, because we do need to talk about these consequential issues, not just in society in general, but how they are affecting education and how we're interrelating with our colleagues, as well as how we're teaching students about the issues of the day. So Debbie, can you tell us a little bit more about you, how you became an educator, very well known in the New York area, and how does your faith, if you don't mind talking about it, present itself in the work that you do?
I actually stumbled on becoming an educator. Doing my undergrad work, I wanted to do social work, advocacy work, and then as a parent of children in the New York City public school system, becoming involved in my children's school and seeing the lack of diversity, the lack of actually language access, I became much more involved in my children's school and helping families who spoke Arabic really understand what's happening in the school, translating materials, helping connect them with their teachers, making sure that they felt represented in terms of their needs and their children's needs. And so through my involvement in the Parent-Teacher Association at the school, I ended up doing an incredibly amazing project with another parent where we realized that people are educated in their own native language, but just don't have access to literature. And so we created this multicultural library. So we ordered adult books, we ordered children's books, and we created this parent library where on a weekly basis, they came and they took these books out in multiple languages. And it was just such a wonderful experience, one, doing this, and then two, seeing the outpouring support of parents coming in and taking out books and bringing them back. Principal at that point was like, it's been wonderful to have you here. And being such an advocate for your community, have a very important need right now that we cannot fill. And we'd love for you to consider supporting this child for us until we're able to find someone. They had an Arabic-speaking child in a special needs classroom that needed an alternative language para. And the child only spoke Arabic. So I said, okay, sure. What do you need me to do? So he's like, can you just apply as a para, a sub-para for this, and you want to stay in the position, we'd love to have you, but we're out of compliance and we need this. I took on the role, became this alternative language para for this student, and loved every moment in the classroom. So I ended up getting my teaching degree. I taught at that school a couple of years, taught at another school, and then became the staff developer for a few years, went into the Aspiring Leadership program at Baruch. And the last semester that I was in the program was actually in 2001. So 9/11 happened. I was in the last semester of the program. And I literally almost dropped out because of everything that was going on in the aftermath of September 11th, the backlash, the discrimination. I became someone who was doing workshops on Arabs, Muslims, and South Asians, helping build bridges of understanding, churches, synagogues, community-based centers. And so my professors at Baruch were like, you've been an A student. We cannot have you drop out. Whatever you need to do, we will support you. And it was a scary time because being someone who was independent, traveling all over the city, September 11th happens, and then I could not travel across the city by myself. I was no longer able to take the train. And what was beautiful then, John, was all of my peers who were in the program all took turns picking me up from my school and taking me to class and then making sure that someone dropped me off. And it was a time that was devastating for all of us as Americans. I ended up completing the program, but at the same time, I started doing cultural diversity work. The Christian Children's Fund came up to me and said, we want you to do this citywide. Can you leave your job? My superintendent then was Carmen Farina, and she's like, we're not losing you. We're going to make this work. You can work half-time for us, half-time for them, and heal the city. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then I went back into the position full-time in the district. And I was doing that work for some time, really bridging the gaps between communities and doing conflict resolution and cultural diversity training. And then eventually I had to keep my word on this certificate program that I got for free. And every year they would check in with me and say, okay, now it's time for you to tell us, are you ready to take over a school? And so then I learned about the small new schools movement that took place in 2005, 2006. New Visions for Public Schools was looking for an Arab American educator to talk about creating a school that would actually teach Arabic and Hebrew. Concept sounded really incredibly amazing. So I spent the year doing an informal feasibility study, speaking to faith leaders, politicians, community-based organization leaders in New York City. And everybody was like, this would be an incredible contribution to our city. And if you're running it, it'd be amazing. And got announced in 2007. It made the New York Times. Once it became announced, everybody was intrigued, and the good and the bad and the ugly started to come out. And so you can only imagine all the negative things that started to be hurled about the school, from being called a madrasa to an institution to create homegrown terrorists to a host of other horrible things that just started to get perpetuated. I always tell people you can find out about it. One, there's a New York Times article that was written, an expose in 2008. About me and about the school. So you can learn about it from the New York Times. And then there are a couple of actually documentaries that were created. One of the documentaries is called Intifada NYC. And then the other one is Shouting Fire from the Edge of Free Speech. Sadly, what happened with the school is, thankfully, it went forward in opening, but I was actually forced out of my position by the mayor and the chancellor at that time. And so the school opened without me, which was one of the most devastating things. And then in October of 2007, I actually broke the silence and I exposed what had happened to me. Actually sued the mayor and the chancellor. I also filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission actually ruled in my favor in 2010. And once I got that vindication, I said, you know what, I'm ready to move on with my life. It was never about money. It was never about anything except to set the record straight of what really happened. So then I was actually in a PhD program. And in my PhD program, I decided to actually focus on American Muslim educators, specifically principals working in public education, to see what life was like for them as American Muslims and what were the perceptions and what did they experience. My dissertation ended up becoming a published book, and the book is titled Leading While Muslim.
First of all, congratulations on the EEC ruling. I had heard of that experience of yours and glad that they did rule in your favor. You moved on, you started this consulting firm, you wrote this book about leading while Muslim. Where are we 10 years later? What is it like either teaching or leading as a Muslim American today?
That's a really great question. My answers are going to be very nuanced and very complex because though people may think Islamophobia was at its peak in the aftermath of September 11th. Yes, it was, but it still is today. And it continues to perpetuate itself. Not only affect Muslim educators and public education, but also Muslims who are in higher education. It is also affecting Muslims who are in leadership positions, whether they are doctors, lawyers, and whatever career fields there are out there. And I think that one of the biggest obstacles for American Muslims in leadership roles is that Islamophobia has been deeply rooted into our society. And the reason that it's deeply rooted is because we are a nation that continues to perpetuate racism. And my firm belief, John, is that if we were to able to eradicate racism, the racism of Black African Americans in this nation, we would then be able to eradicate Islamophobia. We'd be able to eradicate anti-Semitism and any of these phobias and things that exist in our society. If we were to start with the root cause of all of this, it's really racism, the ingrained racism that exists in our nation, that exists globally, that we need to work on. The fact of the matter is, we've seen in the aftermath of September 11th, the perpetuation of creating fear mongering of Muslim Americans. And the work that I was doing and continue to do when I ask people, what's the first thing that you think of when somebody says to you, a Muslim man? What are the first things that come to your mind? And I don't ask them to say it verbally, but I ask them to write it on a Post-it, and then we ask them to just go put it on a chart paper without actually all of us being able to see what they put up. And you'd be surprised. First thing that a lot of people associate is terrorists. It's because the perpetuation that has been created by the media, the perpetuation that has been created by the US government in the aftermath of September 11th, the targeting of Muslim Americans with the Patriot Act, the detentions and deportations of American Muslims in the aftermath of September 11th, this whole fear of brown men who have beards just created this hysteria where not only did we have the government targeting Muslims, Arabs, and South Asians, but then what we started to see was individuals who started to self-deputize themselves to actually do this type of targeting of Arabs, Muslims, and South Asians. And these people are actually, I call them the Islamophobia industry. And Fair and Accuracy years ago did this report called the Smearcasters, and it highlighted 10 prominent Islamophobes that basically just targeted people who are Arab, Muslim, or South Asian, and targeting them in a public way where they launched campaigns to actually have them removed from their positions or to be discredited in their communities from having an opportunity to expand their leadership. We saw this play out in my case with the school. They felt that I was going to not only have, this school in New York City, but that I was going to replicate it and have multiple Khalil Gibran International Academies across the country. They feared that I was going to incorporate Sharia law. When we were doing outreach for the school, I would have people come into the audience and they would basically ask me, are you going to separate the boys from the girls? Are you going to be teaching them to hate Christians and Jews? Are you going to be using maps that don't have Israel on them? It was just the most ridiculous, crazy things that you can imagine being asked.
And Debbie, knowing a little bit about you and your work, you also do a lot of interfaith work as well.
Mm-hmm.
Could you describe that a little bit?
Absolutely. When the attacks on me and the school were happening, my biggest advocates and who actually came out and stood in my defense and really were out there were actually all my interfaith partners. And the interfaith work that I was doing started before 9/11. I was a member of the Dialogue Project, which brought Muslim, Christian, and Jewish individuals together to build bridges of understanding and talk about what are the things that are dividing our communities. And for example, the most prominent topic there was Palestine and Israel, and how that has also manifested in creating divisions between Arabs and Christians and Jews and Muslims. Through that work, I met so many faith leaders because they were also involved in this work. And in the aftermath of September 11th, They were there. They stood with us in solidarity. They organized and mobilized around the detentions and deportations. They created opportunities for us to educate people about Arabs and Muslims and South Asians. That time with the school, they were also my biggest allies. That was something that was an investment on my part because I love the work. And then just seeing how people came out and supported was just really incredibly beautiful.
You obviously went through a lot post 9/11. We find ourselves in not in exactly the same situation, but we definitely are in a time of tension given the conflict between Israel and Hamas. What has it been like, if you don't mind sharing, as a Muslim American for yourself post this conflict? And what are you hearing from other Muslim Americans, particularly educators?
Thank you for asking that question. John, I want to start by saying to you that I've experienced post October 7th, I have been experiencing post-traumatic stress from what is happening. And the reason that I am experiencing it is because during my time at the Khalil Gibran International Academy, the New York Post went after me over the word intifada. They took my words out of context. They distorted them. There was a group of people that called themselves the Stop the Madrasa Coalition. They were going to all of the events that they thought I might be going to. They found a T-shirt at an Arab heritage event that read Intifada NYC. They looked up the organization, saw that this organization was sharing space with another organization that I actually sat on the board, made this tenuous connection about me, and then basically portrayed me as condoning and supporting and creating and wearing the T-shirt, which I had nothing to do with the T-shirt. I had nothing to do with the organization. We ended up doing this interview where the Department of Education felt like that I needed to do it. There was a press person on the call with me, and the interview went well. The person from the press office said, "You did a good job." The next day, the headline was, "Principal is revolting." It was just the most horrific thing that you can imagine. And seeing this headline and seeing in the days afterwards the pressures that the Department of Education was getting from various institutions who were dismayed and unhappy about this ended up forcing the Department of Education to force me out of my position. So when October 7th happened, I started to feel that post-traumatic stress that I experienced back then, because it's hard to be an educator, Muslim and Arab educator in the United States for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Fast forward to October 7th, which absolutely was one of the most horrific things to see happening. It's devastating to see 1,200 people being killed, hostages being taken. And it was also devastating to see the response to this and plummeting of Gaza, and where we are now probably at 35,000 people who've actually been killed by the Israeli military forces. It's been devastating. And educators, not only Arab and Muslim educators, but even Jewish American educators and others across the city here in New York City have really struggled about being able to talk about what is happening. And the struggle has been, I'm afraid that I may say something, that I may offend someone. I don't feel that I'm equipped. I'm not sure how to talk about this. I have emotional connections to the land, to the people. How do I do this? Arab and Muslim educators feeling like, oh my God, I don't want to be a target of a witch hunt. And sadly, John, there have been a number of teachers who've actually been targets of these campaigns. The New York City public school system has been trying to do its very best to make sure that children are safe, that educators are safe. They created a program called Meeting the Moment. And this program is to actually bring resources together and educators and academics and others to help teachers meet this moment through professional development. They've created resources to explain the Israel-Hamas war. They put together resources on anti-Semitism, and they also put resources together on Islamophobia, which I helped put together for educators to be able to utilize.
You more or less foreshadowed my next question. How do we teach our kids about Islamophobia and how to prevent it? And then two, what should educators say, not say in this time of crisis? And how do they protect themselves if they are Muslim American educators?
Great question. Well, first I want to say, John, one of the things that we need to do is first we have to do our own internal check-in. Are we at a place emotionally and mentally able to have these conversations? We all are connected to that land. This is the Holy Land. This is the place where Christianity, Judaism, and Islam were birthed. And so everybody feels a sense of connections. And the work that I've been doing is helping people process their feelings, helping them understand where they are, where their heart is, and helping their heart heal, and then working with them to start using their head on how to actually work with students. And we owe it to our students because right now, what is happening and what's been happening in the last 7 months is all our children have to understand what is happening in the world is social media. And social media, as you know, once you click on one video, you're going to get the same algorithm of the same type of rhetoric from different people and in different ways. And so they have nowhere to process this information. They also have their families who they're having conversations with, family members, neighbors, but nowhere to process what they are feeling, what they are experiencing, and what is fact from fiction, what is propaganda. So it is really imperative for educators to create that space to teach our students critical thinking, to actually understand what is fact, what is fiction, and how to create their own informed opinion on an issue. Well, how do we do this? So I talked about us as educators doing our own self-check with our heart and then with our head and getting ourselves to a place that we can actually be able to do this work. Second, how do we do this work? You have to make sure that you are prepared to do this work. And what are the preparation steps? Like any classroom situation that we are going to encounter and talk about, we have to establish classroom norms, community agreements, setting the stage or setting the table for that dialogue that we're going to have, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's whatever issue of the day that we're talking about. And so with those classroom agreements and helping students understand, these are our agreements. We're going to be talking about a sensitive topic. We need to make sure that we're using I statements. We need to make sure that we are actively listening and processing what our peers are saying, not passing judgment, asking clarifying questions, understanding what the other person is saying, really setting that table for students to understand this is how we're going to have this conversation. Start by opening up to students and asking them, how is this making you feel? And what's really interesting, John, because I'm doing this work with various schools, is that what we see both with educators as well as with students, whether you are an Arab, Muslim, or a Jewish educator or a Jewish student, they are all mirroring the same things. And that is fear of being attacked, fear of Islamophobia or anti-Semitism, fear for their family members, whether they're Palestinian or they're Israeli, fear of war, an escalated war, which right now we are in the middle of seeing escalated war in the region. And so being able to have them in a room and actually sharing these things with one another helps them understand, like, we are actually, we're sharing the same fears and concerns. And then helping them find common ground to acknowledge each other's humanity and acknowledge the fear that they're all feeling and the concerns that they're having, and finding ways to be able to help them coexist is really critical. And so the way that we've been doing this work is we have Arab and Jewish facilitators that are going and facilitating these courageous conversations, starting with the heart and then going to the head, having a set of lessons that we have created that we take them through a training and then help them facilitate these conversations in their classroom. And what's really beautiful about it is when we've done some of these trainings, they're like, oh, this is, yeah, I know what community agreements are. Yes, I've done what does, an I statement, how to use an I statement. And we're like, yes, we're not creating something new. What we're saying is use what you've been using, but just remind the kids and help them understand that these are the expectations for us to have these conversations, and to trust in our kids and help them understand, John, and this is the other piece that I think is really, really critical, is helping our young people understand anti-Semitic tropes. What are they? And how important it is that we understand what they are. What are Islamophobic tropes? And understanding them and helping students understand when you're talking about a people or a crisis or whatever it is, to try not make generalized statements about people and to really constantly remind them of that. You'd be surprised how many adults that we've done workshops with that did not know all of these tropes. We've also, in these trainings, pointed out glimmers of hope in our school system. So, for example, Millennial High School in Park Slope, in the days after October 7th happening, their Muslim and Jewish student associations came together and penned a statement of solidarity and support, and not allowing what is happening in the Middle East become the dividing factor for them. There was also a school district in New Jersey, Hillcrest School District, that did the same with their student associations. And so we've used these as models of this is the things that your students could do. But what we also have done with these two pieces is we've said this did not happen in a vacuum, or they just all said, no, it's important. They've been working together. And so we have to look at how we create an environment for our students to build those bridges between each other, not in time of crisis, but prior to crisis, where they come together, bake bread, do interfaith opportunities, initiatives, projects, etc. And that's why those two schools were actually able to get those statements shortly after October 7th out there. And so these are really the things that we as educators really need to do. Now, another important point to one of your questions was, well, what materials, what do I bring in? As educators, our job is to teach our kids to be critical thinkers. Our job is to provide them multiple perspectives on issues. Our job is to encourage kids to read through them and to make their own informed opinion on whatever that issue is. That is our job. Our job is not to indoctrinate. Our job is not to influence them to have an opinion. Our job is really to provide them everything that's out there on a topic, the good, the bad, the ugly, and allow them to be able to sift through this material and make their own informed opinion. Even if we don't agree with it, we have to do it. And I firmly believe that, especially with the Palestinian-Israeli Middle East crisis right now that we are seeing, it does not serve us a purpose to go in there with a side. When we do so, what we are doing is creating an unsafe environment for our students.
Indeed. And on that note, Debbie, what about our Muslim educators? How do we help them navigate this challenging time? What advice would you give to Muslim educators?
My advice to Muslim educators is really to try your best to maintain neutrality with your students, create that safe space for both your Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, and Jewish students to feel that they are in a safe space, to be able to do this work with them and help them process what they are experiencing. And I think one of the most important things in this work for me is helping students feel empathy for one another. No matter what side you're on, there has to be a level of empathy that we can help students feel in some shape, way, or form. We are human beings. The Muslim teachers, Arab teachers, the Jewish teachers, we're all human beings, and we all have our own emotions. We all have our own internal struggles that we are going through. And I think that one of the most powerful things that can happen is for schools to actually create an opportunity where teachers within that school have the opportunity to have a dialogue. And these dialogues among the teaching staff should be done with restorative justice circles where people can actually hear one another, share their personal experiences with what is happening, and be able to walk out of there not feeling alienated, not feeling violated, not feeling targeted, but just simply being able to share the pain and the anguish that they're feeling. I think when educators, schools have this opportunity to actually have this conversation, it helps dispel the stereotypes. And so it is imperative for schools to come together and to create materials to be able to give students a holistic understanding. It's also imperative to actually work with students on this topic to dispel the myths, the misinformation, because they only have social media. And we know that social media is skewed. And so that's why this work is really important. And I mentioned to you earlier that when we facilitate these conversations, we have an Arab American and a Jewish American who show up. And we do this because we want a model. We want a model for teachers. We want a model for students that it's going to require both of our communities to bridge the divides. It's going to require both of our communities to bring healing.
Debbie, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
You can find out more about us at Bridging Cultures Group. Our website is bridgingculturesinc.com. You can also find out about us on social media. I'm on LinkedIn. That's where I met John. Bridging Cultures Group also has a LinkedIn page. That's the bulk of it.
Debbie, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a very insightful and informative conversation, and I know perhaps a somewhat difficult one. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, John. And I hope that it's going to be beneficial to both Arab and Muslim and Jewish educators to see that there is hope for us to be able to do this work to help our students process this global issue.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.